Greetings, podcast listeners. Welcome to another episode of my series on Mussolini's Italy. Today, I'll be speaking about the problems with the democratic government of Italy from 1919 to 1922. From 1919 to 1922, the Italian government aligned with the term trasformismo, and the government was elected through proportional representation. Trasformismo is a term for a centrist coalition government that rejects the transition of the state of the government to left or right while also holding so-called liberal views. Meanwhile, proportional representation is an electoral system which means the higher the percentage of votes a political party receives, the more seats they can have in parliament. So basically, the number of votes that they receive are proportional to the number of seats that they receive in parliament. In terms of the political structure of Italy from 1919 to 1922, the king served as the head of the government. He had the power to issue royal decrees, which are laws and orders that are directly passed by the monarch. Additionally, he had to sign and could veto parliamentary bills. He was also heavily involved in foreign affairs. The king was responsible for appointing the prime minister and cabinet ministers, who were responsible for appointing prefects, who controlled provinces and worked with the elected councils. The king also appointed the Senate, and these members were appointed for life. The role of the Italian people was to elect councils, and initially only 2% of the population of Italy was able to vote for councils, although this was gradually extended. The Italian people also elected deputies. Although the king appointed the prime minister, the deputies had to have confidence in the prime minister. The deputies became part of the Chamber of Deputies. They were the legislative body responsible for making laws. The Chamber of Deputies was a part of Parliament. The role of Parliament was to impose taxes, enforce conscription, and pass some reforms. But meanwhile, the Church also had a very powerful influence in Italy. As a result of the implementation of proportional representation, many different parties with differing views were in government. For information on 5 key political parties of Italy in 1922, please click on the link to my website in the description of this episode of my podcast. On to the problems of the democratic government in Italy from 1919 to 1922. One of the main problems of the democratic government of Italy from 1919 to 1922 was the unstable leadership. In the 4-year period of 1919 to 1922, there were 5 prime ministers. These prime ministers, Orlando, Nitti, Giolitti, Bonomi, and Facta, came from various political parties and failed to sustain their rule by maintaining control over the government. Thereby, the frequent change of prime ministers resulted in a weak and inept rule. Each prime minister failed to unite the elected political parties, which was the only way that Italy would be able to effectively solve the post-war problems. As a result of this, the government was discredited and faced increasing resentment from the Italian people. Another problem faced by Italy's democratic government was the fear of communism. After the First World War, the Italian economy took a downturn, and certain groups of people, such as the bourgeoisie, upper class, and businessmen, began to fear the rise of communism, as the working class began looking for solutions to their problems, seeing communism as a promising option. Meanwhile, the Italian People's Party, which was based on Roman Catholicism, feared the ban of religion due to communist ideology. Furthermore, the Democratic Liberal Party supported the National Fascist Party, who promised to protect business owners and enterprises from communism. Therefore, the fear of communism caused instability within the government. Meanwhile, the population of Italy itself was divided in half. As the north was industrialized and connected to other countries by land and rail links, it was more developed as a result, with the south remaining mainly agricultural. A third problem of the democratic government of Italy from 1919 to 1922 was the divergent beliefs and aims held by the political parties in government. During the period of 1919 to 1922, there were 5 main political parties in parliament, including the Italian Social Democratic Party, the People's Party, the National Fascist Party, the Democratic Liberal Party, and the Socialist Party, all holding contrasting beliefs. However, trasformismo meant that they had to form a coalition government. As all of these political parties held such divergent ideologies and represented different classes of Italian people, it was impossible for them to decide on policies and how to solve the post-war problems. Therefore, the government failed to unify and solve Italy's post-war problems, and the Italian democratic government, which was in place from 1919 to 1922, was discredited and resented by Italians. The final problem of democratic government in Italy from 1919 to 1922 was the failure to compromise to deal with the post-war problems. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was seen as a blunder, and their victory in World War I a mutilated victory. Prime Minister Orlando was unable to obtain the territories that Italy wanted following the First World War. Furthermore, he was refused some of the territories promised under the Treaty of London of 1915. As they were unable to bargain for a better settlement, his government was seen as weak and unable. He was also seen as a failure, as his incapacity to speak English weakened the talks. As a result, the popularity of extremist and fascist parties increased, as they were perceived as more powerful and presented solutions to their problems. Finally, the Biennio Rosso were 2 chaotic years, marked by revolutions and uprisings, which were sparked by the government's failures to solve problems, importantly, the economic crisis and high unemployment rate following the First World War. The protests took place across the country, led by various political parties from all areas of the Italian political spectrum. However, by 1921, the movement had declined significantly as a result of an industrial crisis that had caused massive layoffs and wage cuts. Despite this, the Biennio Rosso, as a revolutionary period, was instrumental to the political development of Italy from 1919 to 1921. It sparked a wave of protests which continued into the fascist March on Rome, which eventually resulted in Mussolini's leadership. For information on 5 key political parties of Italy in 1922, please click on the link to my website in the description of this episode of my podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of my podcast. Please click subscribe to be notified when the next episode is released. You may use the links in the description of this episode to go to my website, which contains additional revision material, or to leave valuable feedback on my podcast or website.